What is up, everyone, and welcome back to the best and brightest YouTube channel of 2025. Thinking optimistically here. If you don't know me, my name is Jake, and you're witnessing one of my patented ego trips. I make YouTube videos where I apply social theory to internet trends and have a little fun along the way. Today I'm going to be talking about a social theorist named Simone de Beauvoir and her theory on why women have been treated differently throughout history called The Second Sex. Now, The Second Sex is actually a whole book. It was published in 1949 in 2 volumes, and it's actually all available online in PDF form, so if you're inspired by this video and want to go read parts of it after, I will leave a link in the description. So normally the format of my videos is I find some internet trend to make fun of, like rich kids flexing on Instagram or landlords gathering on a forum where they complain about how hard it is to oppress people. And I'll rip on some of those people for a little bit, and then in the second half of the video, I'll tie it to some social theory like hegemony or gentrification, and everyone has a lot of fun and gives me lots of praise. I'm trying something different for this one, and I'm actually splitting that formula into 2 separate videos. So my last video was about quote-unquote nice guys who say that women won't date them because they're too nice, but it's actually because they're brutal, unapologetic misogynists. And then this video is where I'm going to connect that concept to the homie SDB and The Second Sex. So if you want to check out that video as well, I'm going to link it right here, and then also at the end of this video, so you'll know the type of guy that I'm referring to later on. That video is more of a comedy slanted video, and this one is going to be more of an educational or informational type video, but with some tomfoolery. So, Simone de Beauvoir. She was a French theorist born in 1908 to a rich family. Her family lost most of their wealth in the aftermath of World War I, and since she couldn't rely on her dowry, she decided to go make a living for herself, and she became a highly regarded graduate student in the liberal arts. She once said this about her upbringing: "My father's individualism and pagan ethical standards were in complete contrast to the rigidly moral conventionalism of my mother's teaching. This disequilibrium, which made my life a kind of endless disputation, is the main reason why I became an intellectual." So she was always about challenging the conventional or the traditional with the modern or the ideal. Basically, if someone says you can't do that, her response is, why not? Beauvoir was an existentialist, and existentialism is a school of thought in philosophy. I'm more of a sociology guy. Philosophy isn't really my jam, but I'm going to do my best to sort of explain this in simple terms and do it faithfully. I find philosophy writing in general to be a bit confusing and abstract. Sometimes you'll just be skimming along and you'll come across a fucked up word like facticity, and you have to do a whole other branch of research just to find out what this one word in the middle of an important sentence means. Like, okay, for example, here's a sentence from the existentialist Wikipedia page. "Facticity is a concept defined as the in itself which delineates for humans the modalities of being and not being."
Bruh. Him and tell me there's a God.
So existentialism is a school of thought that focuses on the experiences of the subjective individual, meaning that it's about the transcendent inner feelings, morals, decisions, and values of a person, or essentially their consciousness, and how that interacts with their life circumstances. Basically, in the existentialist school of thought, you're a thinking, feeling entity before you're anything else. Before your nationality, your ethnicity, your race, your gender, your social class, your Hogwarts house, or anything else, you're a living, thinking, feeling consciousness. And while your experiences and your social positioning may influence who you are as a person, you are still ultimately responsible for who you are and what you do. You can't simply, for example, commit a cruel act and then say, well, I had a rough life up till this point and that made me a cruel person. No, you're still an individual, you still made that choice to do that thing. And as subjective persons in an objective world, there are realities that exist outside of our own perspective. You exist as a person and you observe other people around you who have their own subjective viewpoint on things. This is called intersubjectivity, which means that we're all subjective individuals viewing each other as objective. When you look at someone else, you don't see their perspective of you, you only see your own perspective of them. This forms the concept of the other and the look. If you're in a room with one other person, from your perspective, the 2 people in that room are me and not me. That person is the other, capital O. If you later wrote a book about your experience being in that room with that person, you'd be writing about yourself as the subject and the other person as the object. Your perspective would involve your impressions of who that other person is, but not who they are as a subjective consciousness. So whatever misinterpretations you may have about that person from your perspective would be preserved in that book. This is referred to as the look or the gaze. Existentialism is also rooted in the concept of absurdism, meaning that the world is an absurd place. There's no meaning or direction to what happens to someone and the world around them. Bad things happen to good people and vice versa. This goes against the Christianity-based common knowledge of Beauvoir's time that good behavior is rewarded by God and bad behavior is punished, and life is all about fulfilling God's commandments. Absurdity is stressful. If you come to the conclusion that there is no direction or pattern to the universe and that bad things can happen to you no matter what you do, and that the only real meaning in life is the subjective meaning that you yourself place upon it, that comes with a lot of responsibility. That is where we come to existential dread. That is simply the feeling of anguish that comes with taking on the responsibility of living in an absurd universe. You could do anything could happen to you, and there's nothing you can do to remove that fear because there's not necessarily one object of fear that's threatening you. That's the difference between fear and dread. If you're in the woods at night and you see a murder clown, it would be reasonable to be scared because there's a scary thing in front of you. And there's steps you can take to remove the object of your fear. Like, for example, shooting the clown. On the other hand, if you're up late at night worrying that you're just not doing enough to reverse the inherent evils of the world, or that your life doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things because there is no God and when you're dead you'll simply be gone, there's not really anything you can do to remove that dread. It's just sort of there and you have to deal with it. So that's my brief crash course on existentialism, and yes, it's depressing. But it also comes with the idea that we create all the meaning in the world around us, so we have the freedom to decide what a meaningful life looks like for ourselves. And personally, I think that's beautiful. Existentialism, by the way, was popularized in the 1940s by a theorist named Jean-Paul Sartre, who happened to be the longtime academic and romantic partner of Simone de Beauvoir. So this was a necessary tangent, maybe, sort of, not really. Let's get back to Simone de Beauvoir. The Second Sex. It's a book. And she wrote it. You got that? It came out in 1949 and was released in 2 volumes, the first being Facts and Myths and the second being Lived Experiences. So, writing from an existentialist perspective, in The Second Sex, Beauvoir makes the case that men have held most of the positions of power throughout history and women have been systematically excluded from important decision-making processes and governance. And as a result, many of our institutions and laws are written from a male perspective, where men are the subject and women are the object. They are the other, capital O. History has shown that men have always held all the concrete powers. From patriarchy's earliest times, they have deemed it useful to keep woman in a state of dependence. Their codes were set up against her. She was thus concretely established as the other. This condition served males' economic interests, but also suited their ontological and moral ambitions. Once the subject attempts to assert himself, the other, who limits and denies him, is nonetheless necessary for him. He attains himself only through the reality that he is not. So basically, according to Beauvoir, the reason for this marginalization of women's perspectives is 1, it's convenient for male-dominated industry, and 2, it gives the men someone to compare themselves to and to look down upon. If men construct for themselves a world where men's perspectives are subject and women's existence is object, then they don't have to focus on taking responsibility for themselves and who they are. They limit their intersubjectivity, and they basically say, I don't have to be a good person and make good choices as long as I'm not that. The other. Capital O, baby. Women are therefore defined in relation and opposition to men who are seen as neutral and unproblematic. Now, obviously, I have to throw this in as a disclaimer. Hashtag not all men. The point that I'm making here is obviously not that every man as an individual hates women and dismisses their viewpoints. Just that there is a trend within mainstream masculinity that does do all of that. That may be obvious, but I feel like whenever you say stuff like this, some dude is gonna pop out of a manhole cover and be like, hey, I never said that. Yeah, maybe not, but a lot of guys do, and that's a problem. And we'll get back to that later. One of the ways that these attitudes towards women and their position as the other is maintained, according to Beauvoir, is the myth of femininity. Basically, the men we're talking about here, they need to see women as the other, right? Like, if you go around thinking that women are just normal people, then you have to, give them human rights and let them make major decisions, and then you can't go on being shitty with no repercussions. So you have to come up with ways to justify your treatment of women. And what do societies do when they need to justify shitty treatment of an identifiable group? Oh, you make them scary. Oh, you're just so scared of them. What are the women doing? We don't know. We can't know. They're just so mysterious and strange, not like us normals. Here's what Simone says. And dreams and queries about the feminine mystery continue still. To preserve this mystery, men have long implored women to not give up their long dresses, petticoats, veils, long gloves, and high boots. Whatever accentuates difference in the other makes them more desirable, since it is the other as such that man wants to possess. Women must remain secret, unknown, to be adored as a faraway princess. So basically all those dumb limitations that we put on women, when they weren't allowed to wear pants, the way that we police the way girls dress in schools, when they had to wear petticoats and veils, there's a reason for all of that. It preserves the myth of femininity. If you give women extra rules, police their bodies, and limit their self-expression, then you create distance from them and you can preserve whatever weird notions you have about women and their place in the world. And it's not just negative ideas about women either. The notion that women are your savior, that motherhood is their sacred duty, that they are the warm, beautiful, delicate counterpart to cold, rational, practical masculinity, that all also works to maintain the notion of women as other, the myth of femininity. So that's where I want to connect these ideas to my last video. In that one, we talked about men who think about women as the other. They think that women are this strange species that is somehow hard to understand. They're not, I promise. They're just people. I think this quote sums it up really well. Of all these myths, none is more anchored in masculine hearts than the feminine mystery. It has numerous advantages, and first it allows an easy explanation for anything that is inexplicable. The man who does not understand a woman is happy to replace his subjective deficiency with an objective resistance. Instead of admitting his ignorance, he recognizes the presence of a mystery exterior to himself. Here is an excuse that flatters his laziness and vanity at the same time. So the guys I talked about in my last video, this is what they're doing. The problem isn't me, it's not my deficiencies of personality and empathy, the problem is women, and they won't date me because they're bitches. Another place you can see this pop up in the internet landscape is dating coaches. I've mentioned these types in another video as well, and there's plenty of YouTubers who have made videos about this type of content. They speak in this way that implies that there's one secret you need to know to make any woman attracted to you, and that also maintains the idea that women don't have individuality. If you claim that there's this one secret that will get any woman to sleep with you, that either means that you think women are basically like dogs that can be trained, or you're emotionally manipulating them. Simone de Beauvoir's work had a ton of influence on social theory and public thought about women. The second sex is sometimes considered the catalyst for the second wave of feminism, which involved widespread discussion of reproductive rights, childcare, exclusionary workplace practices, and the glass ceiling. All this being said, even though Simone de Beauvoir's work was incredibly influential, she's also sort of a controversial figure, and I want to address some of that. Simone de Beauvoir was controversial in her own time. She was bisexual, as the best people are, and she never married, but she had a number of long-term open relationships. The longest and most noteworthy one was with Jean-Paul Sartre, and unfortunately, that was a lot to handle for the press at the time. That was very unconventional for the time, and the two had massive influences on each other's work as well. She was also a teacher in her time at the secondary level, and more than one of her students reported being sexually exploited by her as minors, and she actually got her teaching license revoked and then signed a petition trying to get rid of the age of consent laws in France, so yikes. And also a lot of her writing defines womanhood in relation to physical traits like sex organs, and of course by today's standards, that's not great. Sex and gender are not the same thing, and trans women are women, and also I think a lot of these ideas probably apply to non-binary femme-presenting people, so it's definitely sort of exclusionary in that way. But even with all that being said, even though a lot of her ideas are outdated now, and she definitely had some unacceptable behaviors in her time, a lot of what she said still rings true, and the impact that she had on the feminist movement and the advancement of the rights of women really can't be ignored. Yeah, her ideas are outdated, they're from 70 years ago, and it's totally okay to not like her, but these ideas are the foundation for a lot of what we still talk about today, and evidently some people actually still do not get it. Now, I'm almost done here, but I want to end on a positive note. Up until this point, I've been describing problems that Beauvoir outlined that we can still see evidence of in today's society. But Beauvoir also talked about solutions and what needs to be done to overcome these harmful ideas about women. This is the tragedy of the unhappy consciousness. Each consciousness seeks to posit itself alone as sovereign subject. Each one tries to accomplish itself by reducing the other to slavery. The conflict can be overcome by the free recognition of each individual in the other, each one positing both itself and the other as object and as subject in a reciprocal movement. But friendship and generosity, which accomplish this recognition of freedoms concretely, are not easy virtues. They are undoubtedly man's highest accomplishment. It demands that man surpass himself at each instant. Again, that may sound like a lot of nonsense, I don't really know, but it's really a simple concept. The way to overcome this conflict is just to not buy into it. Fellas, gentlemen, this is mostly for you. If you like a woman and she doesn't like you back, that's fine. It's not a problem. If you ask someone out and they're not feeling it, that just means that that individual is not interested in what you want from them right now. That doesn't mean there's a problem with women or even necessarily a problem with you. If you're this guy, there's a problem with you and you need to work on yourself. But in general, people just gotta move on. Treat anyone you're interested in or that you work with or that you know in any way as a friend first and try to understand their perspective. And if they make a decision that's not what you want, try to understand their reasons for doing it. It's not hard. Here's my last quote from Beauvoir. She's referencing a 19th century writer named Stendhal. This tender friend of women and precisely because he loves them in their truth, does not believe in feminine mystery. There is no essence that defines woman once and for all. The idea of an eternal feminine seems pedantic and ridiculous to him. That's really it. As I said in the last video, women are people, and as this person said, it's really unfortunate that we still have to say that. But Beauvoir put it in writing 70 years ago, and evidently, some people still need to hear it. In conclusion, I think Flo Milli said it best. Men seem to irritate you pretty easily. Yes, they do. It's their pure existence. Sometimes they just don't know things and don't understand. That's annoying. It's a whole bunch of things. I could write a book on it, to be honest. I hope she does. And with that, I'm going to end this video here. Folks, thank you so much for listening to me and for being a part of this. Let me know what you thought about this video in the comment section below, and if you liked it, I would really appreciate it if you would click like on this video and tell your friends about it and watch my other videos, because if you like this, you'll probably like them. A lot of them are more silly than this one. This one doesn't have a lot of jokes, but that's because there's a lot of theory I'm trying to talk about here. Oh, and subscribe also. I'm trying to start a cult here, and I don't yet have enough people to really make that sustainable, so, you know, hop in. Last thing before I go, it may be a while before I post my next video. I'm moving next week, so I still have to pack up and I gotta focus on that, and then I don't know how long it's gonna take me to get set up at the new place, so I'm gonna try and get another video out in 2 weeks, but it may be closer to 3, so we'll see. Just bear with me. Oh, and follow my socials. I'll link them in the description. I'm on Twitter and Instagram, so I'll let you know if anything's kind of holding me up. So yeah, this is gonna be the last video in this apartment. We've had some good times here, but not gonna miss that. And yeah, I'm not sure what the new setup is gonna look like in the new place. I'm gonna have to figure it out, but the first order of business is going to be not putting several human faces in the background that screw up my autofocus and then ruin entire videos for me. Yeah, that was an oversight on my part for sure, and that's gonna be rad. All right, thanks again, everyone. You're the best, and I think you're the best. Take care of yourself.